If you are someone that has gone through their own personal healing journey and you're started to notice that the path that you're on, the career maybe that you've pursued, it doesn't quite fulfill you in the way that it used to. Maybe at one point in time, it was like, oh, this is it. This is what I'm meant to be doing. And then you start to do some personal healing, and then all of a sudden it's like, this isn't it. This doesn't quite work. This doesn't quite connect with the deepest layers of my soul. So know that if that is happening to you, you're definitely not alone. I have worked with a lot of different students from all around the world who actually begin to go through career transitions after they've started to go through their own personal healing journey. And sometimes they're still going through it when they get to me. And people that I work with, they're typically spiritually inclined, creatively inclined. Sometimes they can be found in the healing domains. And oftentimes they don't start saying, hey, I'm going to seek out a new path. Sometimes it starts as simple as, hey, I need to do some personal inner healing because I just want to get my life a little bit better. I know that there's some things that I need to look at and confront, some potential hard truths that maybe I'm avoiding. Maybe you heard some other people doing some of this kind of work. Maybe you heard some phrases like shadow work, trauma work, and you said, hey, maybe I should go and do some of that too, because maybe one of your situations is you can't stand up for yourself, or maybe you have a fear of being alone. And so there are certain things out there that when you hear this stuff, you're like, okay, that sounds like me. Maybe I should go and look into this. And so you begin almost in a sometimes a naive and sometimes an innocent way to begin walking that kind of a journey and saying, look, there's some things internally that I have to look at. And as you start to go through this process, you're not looking for a different path in life or a different career, and you're just trying to do some self-development stuff that might help you just in your everyday life. What can often happen is that it can begin this chain of events, and this chain of events that is completely unexpected. And a story that comes to mind is somebody that I worked with, and before I started working with her, we actually met on a Zoom call. And so we jumped on a Zoom call and I started talking to her and I asked her, like, how did you get here to the point where you wanted to start looking at your career path? Like, why are you at this point where you want to confront your purpose, your calling, your vocation? And she said it was quite funny that she didn't actually mean to get here. And that 2 years prior, she had actually just started going through her own personal healing journey. And the way that she began was that she started to ask these certain questions around, why am I such a people pleaser? Why do I feel as though I have to say yes to everybody? Why do I feel as though I always put everyone else's needs before my own? Why do I feel as though my partner, my family, my friends, they always get placed in front of my own personal needs? And why can I not say no to these people? And so it started as just like, hey, I just want to learn how to set some boundaries. I just want to learn how to say like, hey, this afternoon on a Saturday is for me, for sitting out in the sun, for reading a good book, for hanging out with my cat. That's for me. Why can I not just say that? Why can I not just set that in stone and make sure that nobody interrupts or intrudes on that place that I've set for myself, that point in time that is meant to be mine? And so she started on this healing journey and this healing process by simply trying to answer this question and bring some boundaries into her life. Now, anybody that has done healing work knows that this is just the very beginning. This is the tip of the iceberg. This is how it starts. And so you go in and with a little bit of lack of awareness, and you start to ask deeper questions like, why can I not say no? And then you start to go down. Sometimes it leads you to what happened to you as a child, what happened to you as you interacted with your family. Were you able to say no then? Or were you always told to smile and agree? Maybe it was part of your conditioning. Maybe it was because of the way that you went through in your education. Maybe you went through a particular religious circumstance. There are all these different things that can happen in life that can cause certain ways where this I can't say no can happen. But that's where it begins. Now, as you start to get deeper and deeper in, as with most healing work, and especially this was sort of brought to the forefront, especially with the depth psychologists, the Jungs and the Freuds. And what they would do is they'd start to dig and dig and dig and really try to get to the bottom of things, really try to get at what is the core root of what's going on here. And you might end up stepping down in such a way internally where you start to notice, like, maybe I fear being abandoned. Maybe I fear of, if I set boundaries, no one's going to love me and everyone's just going to leave. Everyone's going to run away from me. And is it worth it? Is it worth it to live a life where I'm completely abandoned and nobody loves me, even if I get my own personal time? And for some reason, you've taken on that belief and held on to it so tightly that you're never able to give your own self some deep needed nurturing. You're not able to have this balance of the selfish side, which is needed. For any people pleaser, they need to build this in. You need to be able to say yes to yourself. Now, as you start to get to the root of it, this inability to say no, and especially in this example, you'll see that this is attached to not only relationships, but it's also attached to work life. And the way in which it was popping up for her was that she was unable to say no at work. She was unable to say, like, hey, I can't take on that extra task. And because she was unable to say no, she's burning out because of it, taking on task after task after task. And we're just always, yep, sure, I'll take it on. Yep, another one, bring it on. And there was just this underlying, hey, if I say no, then there's a fear of abandonment, there's a fear of being fired, there's a fear of everybody saying that what she did was wrong. And this root, where that gets started to get into contact with as you start to do any sort of healing process, it impacts not just one area of life, not just the area of life that you were trying to address consciously, but it also impacts the area of life that, or many different areas of life that you might not even be aware of. Because it's like a web, right? The root is stuck to many different facets of your life. And it's going to show up, if it's a root area, it's going to show up not just in relationships, but also in your career, but also just in how you live and how you operate and what you believe and what you believe to be true and how you see the world. It's going to impact everything. And because it impacts everything, what can happen is that all of a sudden, you've begun, hey, I'm just going to look at my relationship, but now, I need to look at my career path. This path that doesn't actually feel that fulfilling to me. It's not actually giving me what it is that I need. Because there's this inner transition. There's a complete shift in worldview and how you view yourself. Because you no longer see yourself as somebody that's always just going to say yes to things. Now you're going to start saying no to things. Now you're going to start to build up some walls. And people that are able to build up walls and say no to things, when they're truly integrated and aligned with themselves, then they're walking paths that aren't anyone else's path. And so as we're going through this conversation, and I've seen it so many different times, it made sense to me that she was starting to look at her vocation and her calling now. She was now at this point where she'd gone through this deep introspective journey and was now on this other side of like, oh, okay, I actually need to start walking a way that feels deeply aligned out in the world. And it's no longer about me simply pushing it off or simply saying yes to things that I do not feel are called to me or I do not feel serve me. And this happens not just with this specific example of being able to say no, but any type of personal inner healing can cause somebody to relook at their entire vocation and the career path that they've chosen. Time after time, people will start to walk past the traditional way. They'll go to school, they'll go to university, they'll get a degree, then they'll get out and they'll do an internship, and then they'll go and do a stint at a particular workplace for maybe a couple of years. Maybe they might job hop, and then they might start walking that path, and that's a little bit closer, but it's not quite it, and then they'll start to stagnate. And during the stagnation period, most people that don't do inner healing work will just stay there. They'll try to numb it, they'll try to repress it, they'll try to, just ignore it. But anybody that starts to really understand themselves at a deeper level can't just keep ignoring it, because there's a sensitivity that is built in when you start to do personal, deeper inner healing work. And the sensitivity doesn't allow you to numb that stuff. It doesn't allow you to repress it. It requires you to face it. And if you're facing it, you don't just face it internally, but you also have to face it externally. It's not simply a matter of, okay, I'm going to face myself internally and then I'm going to leave the external as it is and everything's going to remain the same. It's like, no, it overflows outwards. The external world has to change because you yourself are changed. And the other thing is that the inner healing completely changes your relationship with the world, and you interact with it in a way that speaks to the new version of you and who you became as you went through that process. And so what this means is that inner healing work, it zooms in and sharpens the focus on who you are. And when who you are doesn't match who you're being, a change is required. And that change will take you closer to the person that you're actually meant to be, which is the person that is walking the path that they're meant to be walking. They're walking their calling. What was really interesting for me was that when COVID hit and the entire collective was forced to introspect, they were forced to go introverted. And if you don't know what introverted means, most people do, but they sort of have a different definition. To me, it means that the orientation of self is pushed inwards. It's directed internally as opposed to directed externally. You can think about it as somebody that is in their imagination as opposed to looking at the wall. Now, the entire collective was pushed in a way that caused them to introspect. And funnily enough, that introspection caused people to have to go through their own personal healing. And many people in the world had big transitions in their lives. They started to say, hey, the work that I'm doing, it doesn't quite work for me anymore. It doesn't quite feel aligned. Businesses were started. The way that people wanted to work differed. They now wanted to go home and stay at home, and they don't want to be called back into the office. And this completely shifted because there was a pause, there was an introspection, there was an understanding of, hey, this is a kind of different type of life that I want to lead as opposed to the one that I'm being asked to pursue. And it shifted them into different careers. Now, it didn't shift them into completely different paths, but the way in which the path was walked changed. And that change happened because people were forced to reflect and look around at what was going on. So we see what that looks like on a collective level. And that very much happens to people on a personal level when, especially, they volunteer for the activity. Now, it's much easier to go through this process of healing when you volunteer for it because you know that you are waiting to expect something. It's quite traumatic for some people when they're pushed into this process when they didn't ask for it, which is what happened during that period of COVID. They were pushed into this forced introspection where they had to sit with themselves. They had to look internally. They had to, very much do what people in prisons do or people in monasteries do. They had to isolate themselves and turn inwards. And by turning inwards, they maybe not, didn't like it, but they had to come into tune with who it is that they are and the path that they're walking, which once again is one of the reasons why so many people change paths during that period of time. And an interesting point on that is that sometimes, the difference between trauma and initiation is that trauma is almost forced upon you. It happens to you, it's external, it doesn't feel like you have any sort of control over it. And an initiation, you're walked through it. You in some way step into it. Now, there are some initiations where you don't, but there are many initiations where you say, like, yes, I'm in for this and let's go through with it. And when you go through the self-healing process, in a way, you are volunteering to change your entire life. You're going to change the way you're going to proceed on through life. And so when you start doing this healing work, do not be surprised at all if a career transition comes forth and asks you to move, to change. Even if you don't know what it is you're meant to move into, there might be this feeling of, like, this isn't for me, there must be something else. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about how I help people to choose the right career path with conviction, maybe you have done your own personal healing work and you're at this point where you're like, hey, I need to know what it is I want to be doing with my life. I want to find my purpose, my calling, my vocation. Then you can check out the Unearth membership, where I help people to know what their career path is by unearthing their career archetype. There's hundreds of career archetypes, maybe thousands. I have and show anyone that signs up into that membership a list of 450 different career archetypes. But these are titles like healer, philosopher, artist, poet, designer. All of these titles signal this energetic pattern that I speak about, which is really this way of being that when contacted and connected with, you're able to know your path and walk your path with conviction. And so if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link underneath the video.